Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So if you guys are new to this channel, I am a photographer and graphic designer from the UK and my name is Sophia Carey. This series that you're watching right now, we are going to be talking about graphic design. This series is designed for photographers. Siri?
Hello.
So yeah, like I was saying, this series is designed for photographers, but you know, it's really relevant to anyone who is looking to learn graphic design. So if you guys missed the introduction to this series, you can check it out. I will link it in the description. It's not vital to have watched before this video, but it is, you know, useful to watch if you want to kind of get an idea of what this series is about. If you guys checked out my color video about color theory, color psychology, and how you use color, then you'll be familiar with some of the on-screen graphics that I had in that video. And I heard you guys, I know you like them, so I've brought them back. This video is going to be a lot of on-screen stuff. I recommend grabbing a pen and a notepad and taking some notes. So when we are talking about typography, what are we talking about? Typography, very simply put, is your appearance of your text. It is the art and the technique of arranging type. And when we talk about type, we are referring to the letters or the characters, and they are sometimes referred to as glyphs. So I did go over this in the introduction to this series, but why do photographers need to know about type anyway? So I'm a firm believer that the creative disciplines, you know, we should learn from one another. Especially as a photographer, we work with a lot of different creative disciplines: makeup artists, stylists, fashion designers. You know, we work kind of across the spectrum of creativity and collaborate a lot with other visual artists. I really believe that we have a lot to learn from one another, and learning from these different creative disciplines is just gonna, you know, help our own practices thrive and grow. So when we're talking about graphic design, a photographer having an understanding of graphic design, or typography in this case, is going to help you be able to create better materials that support your brand. I'm talking marketing collateral, pitch decks, media kits, client communications. Using graphic design is just going to make your photos look even better. Typography makes up so much of our world. I'm sure if you look around wherever you are right now, if it's your bedroom or your living room or your garden, maybe not your garden, I don't know, it depends where you live. But if you look around, you'll see type everywhere. From right now, I'm looking at the type on my t-shirt, I'm looking at the type on my camera. If I look around, I've got a calendar over there. So understanding how to use type is, of course, important if you're putting out any kind of visual communication. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is the language of type. So here are a few keywords that I'm going to be using throughout this series, and I just want you guys to get acquainted with them. So typefaces versus font. This is something that I know a lot of people get mixed up with, because really they sound interchangeable, but they're not. When we talk about your typeface, we talk about your font family. So this might be your Arial or your Helvetica, or, you know, I could throw a few more out there, but you probably have got the gist with that. And when we talk about the actual font, we are talking about the style of the type. So for example, we might use Helvetica Ultralight, and that is your font, and it belongs to the Helvetica font family or typeface. That's a really simple distinction, but it's important to know. So legibility and readability. These two are often both used interchangeably, but they're not interchangeable again. So when we talk about legibility, we're talking about how you can differentiate words and letters from each other. How easy is it to, you know, recognize one letter from another letter? When we're talking about readability, we're talking about how inviting is your type? How inviting is the text? Are we making readers want to read it, basically? Serif versus sans-Serif is another big one. And what that refers to is the actual makeup of the type. So when we talk about serif typefaces, we're referring to typefaces that have these little slabs, these little legs or feet, or however you want to call them. And really, serif typefaces are usually more decorative, and you'd use them in more of a classic sense or a traditional project. Some serif fonts can look quite reminiscent of older type. If you think like old newspapers, you know, that kind of thing is often utilizing a lot of serif typefaces. Sans-Serif is simply without serif. So sans is French for without. So that just means that they don't have those little slabs on the end of them, and they're usually easier to read on computers and considered a little bit more modern, a little bit more contemporary. If you keep your eye out, then you'll probably notice that most things that aren't editorial pieces utilize sans-serif typefaces. Of course, there are exceptions, but if you look around, you'll probably find that to be true. It's important to take note that fonts have their own language. We are talking about visual communication here, and typefaces, fonts have no exception to that rule. They are communicating with the viewer visually, just like colours do, just like anything else we kind of talk about, like icons. Type is able to communicate with you guys. So something I'm going to be talking about as a really good example of that is Comic Sans. If you guys are looking at my screen right now, I have taken you to a website called Comic Sans Criminal. And essentially, Comic Sans Criminal is talking about how you can use Comic Sans more appropriately. So Comic Sans is a typeface that has had a lot of hatred. And I'm sure if you are aware of the design sphere at all, then you'll probably already know that. But really, it's not had any hatred because it's a bad font, just because it's kind of a hatred grown out of misuse, people using it wrongly in the wrong circumstances and just not appropriately at all. So if we take a look at Comic Sans Criminal, you can see that it kind of tells you the story of Comic Sans. So it tells us that Comic Sans was made for comic book style help speech bubbles. And after that, it became popular with children. A fun fact is that it is actually quite easy for dyslexic people to read typefaces like Comic Sans. Before long, the typeface was being used and not in its intended purpose. So that's when we start seeing people like hospitals or corporate entities, churches, all these other places in the world using this typeface, and it's not really communicating very appropriately. So Comic Sans Criminal shows you a few examples of where the typeface might have been used kind of a little bit out of the way it was meant to be. Shout out Surrey Police, my home county, getting it wrong. And Comic Sans does a really good job of explaining how fonts have personality, how typefaces have personality. A good example that Comic Sans Criminal uses is where you might use a serif typeface like Times New Roman that is considered quite, classic, maybe corporate, serious, and you wouldn't necessarily put that on a children's birthday invitation, just as you shouldn't tell someone that they have a disease by using Comic Sans. It just doesn't communicate quite the same message, because Comic Sans is fun, it's bubbly, it's not the kind of typeface you want to be using when you're delivering bad news. I will link Comic Sans Criminal in the description. I definitely recommend clicking on, have a look at it yourself, read what it has to say. It does a really good job of explaining the difference between using different typefaces to communicate different messages. That's another reason why when we're talking about using type as a photographer, it's really important to understand what typefaces are communicating. If you're trying to appear professional, then you probably don't want to send a pitch deck to a corporate client using something like Comic Sans. It's just going to discredit you. It's going to make you look, like you don't know what you're doing. Similarly, when we're talking about personal branding, you want a typeface that is going to reflect your personality. Something that as a designer you'll do quite often is that you'll ask maybe a set of questionnaire questions when you're branding or creating a piece of work, and you'll say what are you wanting it to communicate? Are you wanting it to be more fun or more corporate or more energetic, more modern, appeal to a young audience, etc. And these questions are important because the designer is trying to work out what it is you're trying to communicate. And as a photographer, when you're putting out your marketing collateral, your client communications and all this stuff, it's also important to ask yourself those same questions. And specifically to this video, are the typefaces that I'm using communicating that for me? So really, this was just an introduction to typography, what is typography kind of video, and next week we are going to be talking about how you can use different typefaces together, how you should pair them, and something called the hierarchy of type. As ever, if you guys are enjoying these videos, let me know in the comments and give it a thumbs up. And again, as ever, I always say this, if there's something you want to know, graphic design, social media, photography, drop me a comment. I'm always taking on board your guys' suggestions. Like I said, I'll be back next week with another video about typography. I'm also back with another episode of my ongoing series, Homage, and I'll be back with normal, regular service as well. So keep your eyes out for that and make sure you subscribe and turn on that little notification bell if you don't want to miss any of it. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next one.